Interesting thing happened this week with Bethesda and Machine Games. They've released a patch for the Indiana Jones, and it seems to have addressed one of the visual issues that we picked up on, which is that the RTGI seemed to be quite sparse within the Xbox version of the game. And it looks like they've produced some kind of adjustment for that. Got this question from Edna Mode. When I first saw John's tech review, I had the feeling that RTGI left something to be desired. After I saw Alex's videos in comparison with PC's lower settings, I felt the Series X should have included an option for a reduced resolution / frame rate mode. Does this patch fix it enough to bring the RTGI quality up to a level where 1800p would be the best way you guys would play it, or perhaps a 40 FPS mode or a 1080p 60 mode is still to be desired? Well, John, there's two aspects to this. First of all, well, let's talk about what the visual enhancements to Indiana Jones are, and then secondly, let's talk about those various mode options that Edna Mode is suggesting there. Now, Edna Mode there is kind of suggesting that we're looking at a comprehensive upgrade to the RTGI, which is across the whole game. But based on what we've seen, that's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's not the case at all. The main improvement just comes down to areas heavy in foliage, from what I can tell. Essentially, the reason it looked off in the first place, from what I gather, is that they simply weren't including all of the detail in the BVH. So when it's tracing into it, for instance, the trees, I think they had a very simplified leafless tree model or something in there that did not reflect what the player was seeing. And as a result, you get tons of light leakage. Everything was glowing brightly. The patch basically fixes that. And that's why I think when they announced the patch, they showed shots from the introduction, which is very foliage heavy. And it's exactly as it says on the tin. It massively improves that. A lot of the glow's been reduced. The light leak is reduced, and you get a lot more deep shadow and contrast and nuance in the scene. But when you step outside of those areas, the difference, I would say, is overall negligible. And I kind of felt that way before, though, to be honest. The RTGI really shines in most of the game, except for in those areas, and they have certainly improved it now thanks to the patch. So it looks like they went back in, added more detail into the BVH, likely to give the RTGI something more to trace into. And yeah, the result is great. It looks a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Cool. But do you think that there is a case that they should have maybe included options that traded resolution for increased ray tracing, or is it just fine the way it is?
My opinion on this is that they made the right choice by limiting this to no modes. I think that's actually what makes this kind of unique in this day and age, is that they just said, here it is. And they've basically fixed the main issue that the RTGI had, which is with foliage heavy areas. And now that that has been solved, image quality is still excellent. I don't really think there's any real use in further enhancing this, because it's not that far behind the PC version, I would say, in terms of what you visually perceive, unless you compare to the full ray tracing mode, of course. But we're not going to get that on the Xbox, obviously. So I think it's fine just the way it is. It's great to have a game like this that just is 60 FPS, good image quality, and ray tracing, and you don't have to make any choices or compromises, basically.
Mm-hmm. That's basically your sort of viewpoint on the entire console modes situation, isn't it, Oliver?
Yeah, I kind of like that in general, when you get this like nice, no compromise presentation, or at least a presentation that's been authored with certain compromises in mind that fit the general play style of most players on these consoles. Certainly, I think having a good, high quality 60 FPS mode with ray tracing, that's really the ideal. You're kind of checking a lot of boxes there. But yeah, I'm glad that they've gone back in and maybe compromised resolution just a touch, possibly, to get that BVH to be more comprehensive there and get that additional RTGI detail. I kind of almost always take additional lighting fidelity over, maybe some tiny margin of DRS there. And I'm glad they have gone in and resolved those lighting issues in accordance with player feedback, because that was a weird and slightly discordant divergence between the PC version and the console version, that we saw such a difference in lighting quality, even between the console versions and the PC version's low settings. I thought that was kind of striking and not super flattering. So I am glad they've fixed those issues, at least in the areas where, you know, it was obviously quite impactful. But yeah, I'm quite pleased with that.
And that's important to note, because the impact areas, there are some other areas later in the game, but most of the game you spend in areas that are not foliage heavy, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like largely this didn't have a huge impact, and all the screenshots you would see in comparisons would show the introduction sequence, which is like 15 minutes long. So it's not an area that was that important, because you don't spend much time there, right? But it is nice that they've improved it, and I would say with negligible hit to image quality. I have not specifically pixel counted, but just playing it on the screen, it looks basically identical to what it looked like before. So
Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we've kind of reached a situation where typically you have like a 30 FPS quality mode or a 60 FPS performance mode, but 30 FPS just isn't id tech, really, is it? It wouldn't really have been a good fit for this. And I think the idea to go in there and basically tailor a single experience at 60 frames per second that is basically what the developer wanted to achieve, and then basically just leave all of the settings tailoring to the PC version. I think that's probably the way forward, really. I guess the only criticism that remains, I guess, is that those console equivalent settings are not accessible to PC, and I think Alex's critique there pretty much remains in effect, which is to say that there's quite a lot of RT hardware out there that is relatively underpowered, everything from Steam Deck upwards, basically. So it would have been nice to have those features in there.
To that end, Rich, I would like to point out that Steam Deck support now has been added, or at least it works correctly.
Right.
At launch, when we attempted it, it was like 1 to 2 FPS, and then it would crash. Right now, if you cap it at 30, you turn the settings pretty far down, you know, make the typical compromise you expect on the Steam Deck, it is actually very playable. Yes, 30 FPS, but given what it's doing and given the specs in the Steam Deck, I'd say it's kind of a win. It is still playable there now.